Well, this morning I conclude a short two-part sermon series I began last week, and I'll just give you a brief summary of last week, knowing that not everybody was here. I wasn't even here, but I did it remotely. But anyway, while there's much that is great that is happening right now, I think one would have to be a turtle with its head in the sand to deny that these continue to be very troubled times in our nation and in our world. Of course, since the beginning of history, each generation has had to confront upending events and times of tumult. And there's a long list of challenges that confront us, and it's likely that each of us would come up with a bit of a different list, in part, unfortunately, driven by partisanship. And clearly our list would also be different on what the challenges are based on where we are economically or socially, racially, religiously, and geographically, to name just a few other variables. That said, most of us would agree we are not in a normal time, whatever normal might mean. What I will say is that many of us are sick and tired of being sick and tired. Last week, you may remember I shared a story about taking a catamaran out into the ocean and how I was unable to lock the rudders down because the locking mechanism was broken. And without rudders, there's basically no effective way to steer a catamaran in ocean waves. And as I mentioned, I believe that a rudderless sailboat or catamaran serves as an apt metaphor for how many people are feeling right now. Rudderless, that is. Lots of folks are not only unsure of what to count on or to latch on to, but how to face each day when new challenges seemingly bumping up from nowhere. It also feels as there are as many opinions and thoughts about how we should navigate these days as there are people. Well, last week I shared that I believe that we really are not rudderless at all, especially if we turn to our faith. That the teachings of Jesus, the presence of the Holy Spirit within us, and the communities of faith ground us in these uneven days. But I also mentioned that there are four words, four focal points, if you will, that can serve as solid rudders to help us gain a sense of direction. These four words, these four focal points, actually happened on Jesus' last night as he was having a meal with his friends. You remember that at the table, at that Last Supper that we celebrate each week, that Jesus took some bread, he blessed the bread, he broke the bread, and he gave it away. And these four actions, these four words, take, bless, break, and give, are transformative words to ponder if we act upon them. Henry Nouwen wrote a book titled Life of the Beloved, and in it he details how each of these four words can change our lives. And I believe they not only can change our lives, but can serve as rudders, so to speak, as we navigate these troubled waters we are within. Last week I spoke about two of the words take and bless. I mentioned that just as Jesus took bread, just as he chose a piece of bread, that you and I and everyone is chosen by God. You and I are not a mistake, not an accident, or a random happenstance. We were chosen by God long before we had consciousness. God chose you. God chose me. We are loved by God. We are God's beloved and cherished beyond our imagination. And again, just as Jesus takes the bread, Jesus takes you and takes me. And if we accept this, if we take it in, if we believe this is true down to our core, not only about ourselves, but every other human being, not only will we find ourselves transformed, but how we show up in the world will be different. Embracing that we are all chosen as a game changer and will help us in the times in which we're living, because it affects how we show up with other people. Do you believe you were chosen by God, taken by God, just like Jesus took the bread? Do you believe that that's the case for every person you encounter this day, chosen and beloved by God? Well, after Jesus took the bread, he blessed it. And just as Jesus blessed the bread, we too are blessed. Blessings surround us. Blessings are everywhere. Some may be very subtle. Others may seem miraculous, like water being turned into wine. But whether big or small, blessings are all around us. And the key is to notice them, to pay attention to them, to claim them for ourselves, to name them, and to share them with others. This does not mean we should deny what is wrong, but it does mean we should not ignore our boundless blessings. And again, focusing on blessings is a game changer that helps us not only with perspective, but to navigate day in and day out. Well, with that short summary, I'd like to get into the two remaining words of break and give. Let's start with the word break. During the Last Supper, when Jesus broke the bread, he did so for a number of reasons. He broke the bread to remind us that he is broken for us, that he died on the cross for us. He broke the bread to remind us that Jesus understands what it means to be broken. He broke the bread to remind us that Jesus meets us and is with us in our own brokenness. And I believe he broke the bread to remind us not only that we are broken, but that being broken is part of what it means to be a human being. Henry Nouwen writes in adapted form with some of my own thoughts. We are all broken. This means we all have cracks and sources of pain and disappointment, suffering, loss, and failures. We all have had our hearts broken. We all have experienced broken relationships. And at times we likely have felt rejected or isolated or not loved as we would wish in our lives. Well, while we have had similar sources of brokenness, for example, a relationship ends, we lose someone we love and grieve, or we feel disappointment about something we've done or did not do, how we experience these and so many other sources of brokenness are unique to each of us. It's so important to remember that how I experience something and how you experience something is not the same. There may be commonalities, but my experience is my pain and your experience is your pain. Henry Nouwen suggests that comparing our sources of brokenness is rarely helpful. And as I thought about this, it caused me to ponder something in my own life history. In the latter part of my dad's life, he and I became closer than we'd ever been. We shared lots of feelings and we shared our love for each other. And when he died nearly 23 years ago, I was at peace with our relationship, who he was, and what we had gone through as father and son. But things were different when I was a teenager. My teenage years were hard, really tough for a number of reasons. Los Angeles in the early 1970s was not a tame or harmless place to live, especially for a teen searching for meaning and purpose in life. I went through a period in those years in which I was confused and down and even depressed. At the time, my dad was in his 50s, running a business. But of greater importance, he was a World War II vet, a WW2 vet. And the beaches of Normandy, the Battle of the Bulge, the liberation of Buchenwald concentration camp were part of his lived and survived experiences. As a result, my dad didn't worry about much, if anything at all. He never talked about his war experiences. He never talked about the hell he went through. He never shared where he got an SS officer's ring. And for years, I believed that while he was kind and generous and selfless and astonishingly civically minded, his emotional life was somewhat stunted. But that changed in the last decade of his life. But when I was a teen and I shared my heartache and my brokenness with him, he simply did not get it. He once said, "You're not being shot at. You're not crawling up a beach. You have food. You have a roof over your head. What's the problem?" He was comparing his younger years with mine, and he forgot that pain is pain, and that struggle is struggle, and that my experience was mine, and it was just as important as his. Well, many years later, I understand where he was coming from. I get what he was getting at. I understand that I had so many blessings growing up. I'm incredibly grateful that all my needs were far more than met. I also understand that keeping perspective is an invaluable skill, that sometimes we do take things for granted, that we can lose sight for things. I understand all that now so well. I'm thankful I did not have to endure what he did. But even though I did not fight in that war, it does not preclude my experiences with brokenness. You see, we're all broken in various ways, whatever the source. So much of the world does not have water or food or safe shelter. Many Americans are destitute and basically have no chance of ever getting ahead. But those kinds of brokenness do not mean that other kinds of brokenness are not just as potent, powerful, and painful. I'm not going to say to the parent that lost a child, or a child who loses a parent, or the fellow who loses his job and has to figure things out, or the person struggling with depression, or the person in the midst of a painful divorce, well, at least you're not starving in India. I'm not only not going to say it, I'm not going to think it, because pain is pain, and brokenness is brokenness. God does not ask us to compare our brokenness. God asks us to embrace the fact that we all have brokenness within and to respond to this by showing up in the world with love and compassion, understanding, a resolve to help and be there for others, and ears bigger than an elephant to listen. And I believe God asks us to live by being vulnerable with others, to be vulnerable with our own brokenness. It's what we need in this time. Regarding vulnerability, the author Brene Brown has a lot worth paying attention to. She writes with some adaptations, vulnerability is the core, the heart, the center of meaningful human experience. Vulnerability is all about uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. It is not a sign of weakness, but of courage. She also notes that sometimes we defend against being vulnerable by striving for perfection, numbing ourselves out, or by thinking about all that can go wrong in the future. She writes that vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. I believe she's right. And this in part is why I believe not avoiding or denying our own brokenness is so important, especially at this time in our lives with what we're faced with. You see, when we're in touch with brokenness, it means we feel. We feel. It means that we can connect with other people in profound ways. It gives us the opportunity to empathize. Hearts that understand how beautiful it is that no one is perfect, no one has it down, we all make mistakes, we all blow it, create space to be real and authentic and the freedom to be a human being. And we need that freedom now just to be imperfect human beings right now. Being in touch with our brokenness helps us not cast stones at others and helps us to learn how to show up like Jesus does. Jesus was broken for us. Should we not share our brokenness with others? All of this and more is why the word break, why brokenness and embracing it and living with it can serve as a rudder in these uneven times. When we're in touch with our feelings and those of others, when we are vulnerable, we become resilient, courageous, loving, empathic, understanding, gentle, and kind. Are those not the things we need most right now in our lives in this tough time? Don't we need to be resilient, courageous, loving, empathic, understanding, gentle, and kind? Being in touch with our brokenness and that of others ultimately serves as the most potent nexus point through which we connect with other people. Now, all I have just touched upon will profoundly change how we navigate this time in which we're living, and will help turn this time with many challenges into a time also filled with many blessings. Well, during the Last Supper, the last action Jesus took was to give the bread away. And when Jesus gave his disciples the bread, he did so not only in a literal sense, but also to send his followers then and each of us now a vital message. When Jesus gave the bread to his disciples, and as the bread represented Jesus, Jesus was not only telling us that he gives himself to us, but that the most important thing we can do ourselves is to give ourselves to others. Here's what Nowen writes with slight adaptations. When we give ourselves to others, we learn that our lives are significant. Our greatest fulfillment in life lies in giving ourselves to others, as Jesus gave the bread to others. I also love what he wrote next. He said, our humanity comes to its fullest bloom in giving. We become beautiful people when we give whatever we can, a smile, a handshake, a kiss, an embrace, a word of love, a present. True joy, happiness, and inner peace come from giving ourselves to others. Now, there's a great word we don't often use, and that word is the word kenosis. It's a great word. It means to empty oneself, to give oneself, to relinquish oneself. And God engaged in the ultimate act of kenosis when God became flesh. God gave himself to us as Jesus. And as God is love, the ultimate expression of love is when we give ourselves, empty ourselves out, become kenotic, so to speak, for the sake of other people. To give to others, to show up as Jesus does. And to stay on course and navigate these difficult times, one way to lock down the rudders and stay on course and navigate is to focus on emptying ourselves out for the sake of others. It shifts our attention. There's not one person who does not have something to give another, because ultimately, giving is about something we all have, and that's ourselves and the love of God. And I love what Martin Luther King wrote, whose life we give thanks for this weekend. Dr. King said, every man must decide whether he will walk in the light of creative altruism or in the darkness of destructive selfishness. There is so much good, so much that is overwhelming and hard. It does feel to many of us that we're out to sea at times. But the 4 words I have spoken about, I believe, will serve as stable rudders to help us navigate the days ahead if we focus upon them and live by them. And just to review, take. You were chosen by God. I am chosen by God. Everyone is chosen by God. Do you believe that? We are all alive because God gave us this life, and we have this life to learn what love is all about. It's true for everybody. We're all chosen. Bless. Immense blessings surround us. Some may be subtle, others quite obvious, but blessings are raining down. Claim them in the midst of your struggles. Name them in the midst of your heartache. Embrace them in the midst of your hurt. Give thanks for them. Share them. Break. We all have brokenness and pain and heartache, some long-standing, others more short-lived and temporary. Connecting with our brokenness, knowing that everyone has their stuff, changes how we see and respond to others. And being vulnerable with our brokenness is how we most potently connect with other people. And connectedness is what we need most of all. Give. We are here to give ourselves, to share, to be attentive to the needs, wants, and pains and joys of others. We're here to show up, to share the love of God through action. Think about these words and these actions. Take, bless, break, give. Such strong rudders to help us make it through these days. And let us now turn to a time of quiet and meditative prayer.